Hello, babies. How you doing? 'Tis I, your sexy host, Samantha Vito, and today we bring to you the director's commentary. Yay! I did promise a movie for those who stick around to this part. So, movie it is. So grab your drinks, grab your snacks, grab your popcorns. Let's get watching.
And maybe the museum on additional content might have something too.
Oh yeah.
We'll focus on this.
Oh, I didn't. Okay. I missed some shit.
Yeah, we did miss a couple, which we'll go through the ones we currently have.
Yeah.
Many regards when it released in 2007, though fundamentally it shared many consistencies with the Rational System Shock series. What elements of System Shock translated into BioShock?
I never heard of it.
Oh, it's a good game, but it's very outdated.
Let's take a look at the long road from System Shock to BioShock.
Woo! Geoff Kelly.
Everyone knows where the game ended up, but I think fans would be interested to learn where this game or the idea of doing this game started. And I think, folks know System Shock and the legacy of that game, huge fan base. Did it start as a System Shock game initially?
No, I mean, 'cause
Okay.
we didn't have the rights to that.
Yeah.
We kind of felt
Yeah.
Feel that.
there was more game design to mine there. That it was sort of, we did that one game, and it was sort of the first game that really combined shooting and RPG, and it was a very small budget. It was a very small team, and it was the first game we had ever done, so we got pretty lucky, I think, in terms of how well it came out, but the odds were sort of stacked against it. And the team, was really enthusiastic about doing a game like that. And time had evolved, and the team was much more, we had done a bunch of games together, and we had a stable technology base, and we were like, okay, well, which System Shock 2 was not. I mean, that engine, no game had ever shipped on that engine. It was a very crude piece of technology. Most of us had never shipped a game at the time. So what if we had a stable technology base, and we had a team that was more experienced and more seasoned, and we had, an actual, like, art director, and which we didn't really have on System Shock 2. What could we do? And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm in the team to really try to do a more mature version of that kind of game.
Yeah. I truly love this game.
Yep.
Fuck off!
This is before we had sold the company to Take-Two, and we were an independent developer, right? We were sitting there, we were using the money we made from other development deals we had, and we would try to scrape together whatever time and money we had to work on this thing. And it was not actually something I was particularly keen on doing. The team was much more keen on doing a sort of a System Shock-ish game than I was, because...
That's your pitching, right? Like System Shock 3 at one point, right?
Well, I mean, there was an actual System Shock 3 that we were pitching back in the day when we were right after System Shock 2, but that never happened. Right. We couldn't get anybody interested with System Shock 2. Sold like 5 copies, right? And so, as the business guy, the guy who had to not only just sort of write the content, but the guy who had to go out and get the deals and pay everybody, I wasn't particularly excited about doing this, because it was very disappointing when we did System Shock 2 and nobody bought it. Got great reviews, got these insane reviews, but it left us in a place where it didn't really move the needle for us in terms of making payroll. So I wasn't super excited about it, because I didn't see a publisher be interested in it, and I didn't see the audience actually particularly interested in this kind of game. And it was really the team who convinced me to invest in this, because they're enthusiastic. I think a lot of them came to the studio because of System Shock 2. And so finally they sort of battered me down. I mean, it's good they did, because I was not the first fan of doing this.
And I know initially there was something called the Serene Dawn.
Listen to the team.
Yep.
That was the name of a cult, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one's, I think, been lost to the... If I remember correctly, Serene Dawn was a cult. You were playing as a deprogrammer that was infiltrating the cult, and your name happened to be Carlos Coelho, who was one of our programmers at the time.
It's named after him, yeah. Then there was a story notion that I always really found interesting, which was that you have these cults, and you have sometimes people who, they're these sort of characters who are really live on the edge of the gray morality, which is these guys who come in and essentially kidnap people out of these cults or rescue them, depending on how you look at it. Because what it really is, from a functional standpoint, it's a kidnapping, right? You're coming to an adult and you're saying, you know, you're hired by their parents or whoever. And this was in the story. It was like a senator whose daughter joined one of these religious movements called the Serene Dawn, you said?
Yeah,
Serene Dawn. And I always thought that was a really interesting tension of this hero who's basically a kidnapper and taking a young woman against her will out of the place that she was in. Now, you could also make the other argument that, well, she was not really there by her will. But there's a really interesting conversation that goes on there. I think there was actually a Kate Winslet movie, a Harvey Keitel Kate Winslet movie, which dealt with a similar
That's a
theme.
great area.
Because usually you hear that story,
Yep.
you know, these deprogrammers as a sort of heroic kind of notion. But I always thought that there's something interesting about agency going on there, and about are people entitled to make bad mistakes, or is it a bad mistake? It all depends on the person. You know, I'm not a fan of religious cults or religion in general, but there seemed to be an interesting discussion of freedom there and independent decision making, and I thought that idea was cool, and that was sort of the basis of it for a while. But it was really mostly for the purpose of we needed something to go out and pitch to publishers, and so we know we didn't have a ton of time to really develop it. So that sounded like, all right, this will do for now.
And was that pre-Underwater City? I mean, this was just like an idea for a story.
We may have stepped away from that to do the cult thing, but then we went back to the underwater.
We had that one room, remember?
We had the one World War II room with the roaches on the ground and like these weird test tube things that you could walk around. I don't know where that fell. It could have been underwater. There was no windows.
The thing is, we were a small business, right? And we were trying to like figure out a way to sell this thing with spend the least amount of money, because we didn't have any money. We didn't have a pot to piss in. So we would do this demo. That was one room basically, just to show. And I'd write up a document, and we'd take it around. I'd fly around the country, be like, "Here's our room." It was a different time, you know. And
we had just come off of SWAT 4. One of the advantages we had is that we were so familiar with that engine at that point that we could really start cranking through, small rooms and lighting and making things look good. So
I took it on the road to sell it to somebody, and nobody cared. We'd go to a publisher, and look, they have to make money, right? And we'd say, oh, it's sort of a spiritual successor to System Shock 2, and they'd be like, well, how did that sell? And I'd be like, my mom likes it. And, and usually we'd be talking to a fan. A lot of executives, like sort of junior executives, were fans of System Shock, and they'd go to their boss and they'd be super excited, and their boss would open up, their Excel spreadsheet and be like, "No, we can't do this." And I think the pitch probably evolved as we kept trying different permutations trying to sell, but we were also out there trying to sell like 2 or 3 other things at the time. We had a pitch for a game called Monster Island, and
well, our SWAT 5 pitch was
Zombie SWAT.
Yeah, we had just come off of SWAT 4, which is like hardcore tactical, and we decided they wanted us to do another SWAT, and we didn't really want to do another hardcore tactical game, so we're like, what if we added zombies to SWAT? Like, you're a SWAT team that fights zombies and werewolves. That sounds awesome. And it was like, no, it doesn't.
And this is before zombies were a thing.
Yeah.
And so we came with this thing called
Division 9, yeah.
That probably would have been even a bigger financial success than BioShock. Wow. But we couldn't get anybody interested in it.
I am interested.
Me.
I am interested. Take my money.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a lot of this stuff was from the 90s. The 90s and the early 2000s. It was before its
What
time.
happened was couldn't sell it, but
Then Buffy
we're always
happened.
sort of independent minded.
Mhm,
So, well,
basically.
what if we sort of did this in reverse. Instead of getting a publisher first and then going doing a press tour on it, what if we sort of did the press first? And we called up a guy, Andrew Park, who's at GameSpot at the time, who was a fan of System Shock 2, and a great guy. And I said, will you come out and look at this thing we're doing and write a story on it? And he was like, sure. And Andrew flew out, and we showed him what we had, which is this very, very rudimentary thing about an underwater base. And he wrote up an article and sort of featured as like, this is the spiritual successor to System Shock 2. And the next day, the phone started ringing from publishers who now all of a sudden saw the article was getting all this pickup and all these comments, and people were excited. And that really, I think, put it over the top in terms of being able to sell it, even though it was not BioShock at that point. It was called BioShock, but it was not BioShock. there would have been no. I don't think there would have been a game. We never would have sold it without Andrew coming out doing that.
My belly's full. Angel's blood.
Why can't they have that fucking dialogue in the game? Holy shit. Okay, okay. That was really interesting. I wish I could see the first one.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges Irrational faced when developing BioShock was figuring out a way to retain the feeling of a deep RPG while making the game accessible to a broader console audience. Ultimately, the team succeeded in creating an intricate system of weapon and character upgrades that gave the player choice and customization while keeping the gameplay fast, lean, and engaging.
Oh yeah, they did.
Yep.
Oh, so well.
One of the hallmarks of BioShock, to me at least, was that it really blended RPG and sort of first-person action game together in a way that, you know, is sort of standard today, but a decade ago was really pretty revolutionary. And I know for the team, I think at some point it became clear that you wanted this to work on consoles, not on PC, right?
Oh, both, yeah.
Yeah. But so the idea of, you know, doing a console game and a PC game, and doing something that sort of felt like a shooter but had much more depth. And I know in some of the early design docs you talked about sort of creating an FPS plus versus an RPG light. What was the difference in your mind between those two?
I think for us is the big difference between System Shock and BioShock ended up being that System Shock was more about your character growth and BioShock was more about the environment. Because with System Shock, we really didn't have System Shock 2. We didn't really have either our team to make enough assets or the visual power to sort of make a really convincing environment. But as we started working on BioShock, the art team was so strong that the ability to tell a story within the environment became the most important thing about the game. That was sort of not something we thought right at the beginning. That was not really a concept we had. But as we started building things, we could realize that the visual world was the star. Rapture was really the star of this thing.
Oh god,
telling
it is.
the story outside of cutscenes, telling it in the world, so the gamer could discover the story rather than us telling him the story, telling him or her the story. And it was still very much for the time. I think for the time, quite different than what you had seen in terms of there wasn't a lot of growth in shooters. So it was still, I think, for the time, very, very revolutionary. But I think System Shock 2 was even more ahead of its time in terms of that growth thing. Because we defocused a little bit. Primarily, part of it was just figuring out how to do that all on a console controller was very tricky.
No, I remember even the early demos, people like, you know, you see a plasma, you see like a upgraded weapon, you're like, oh, I've never seen that before in a shooter. And that was, you know, when you were coming out of the sort of, you know, the Quake, Doom, Half-Life, you have, you know, 8 weapons on the keyboard, and you sort of knew what they were, and they weren't going to change. Sean, was that something that, you know, from a sort of creative standpoint, was it always clear that that was something you guys wanted to do, or it evolved over time because you wanted to have more depth in the game?
I mean, it certainly evolved over time, and each, you know, upgrade path was slightly, you know, had its own unique challenges. Like certainly upgrading the weapons, you had to design a base weapon that didn't feel like crap. Still felt like something that you wanted to use, but then the ability to add the upgrades to that, and each of the upgrades could come in any order, so you have to be aware that this, you know, parts A, B, and C could come in at any different time to upgrade the weapon. In a first-person shooter, that's your star. That's the thing that you're seeing all the time. When it comes to other things, plasmids, things that are, you know... Tonics, yes, sorry. It's been
Come on, Sean.
I know, it's 10 years. Those things were more offloaded to machines that you would then have to interact with, so you're not carrying the inventory around with you. But each of these decisions on, you know, how we're going to upgrade the player, you know, it wasn't like a mouse and keyboard. Okay, we can just use the mouse, and you have all these buttons at your disposal.
You could arbitrarily point at a part of the screen really easily, which you could do in System Shock 2.
Yeah, so we certainly, you know, learned trial by fire when we were trying to adapt these things to the console at the time.
Yeah, and like having, you know, different ammo types and stuff like that. Like we went through numerous iterations of the interface to make it. Like we had the first times we sort of put the interface into play. It was very obtuse and very tricky to get your head around, and we just kept working on it and working on it and working on it because you want to feel like second nature. But that was, we spent a lot of time on that.
I really appreciate that the character is not flopping his gun like a flaccid dick,
Yeah.
like in Metro.
Play through this game. What was it to give the player a better sense of authorship over the experience, or what was driving that?
I've always liked the idea of giving the player a lot of agency in terms of their play style and experimenting with the play style and trying different things, seeing what worked and didn't work, and interacting with the environment. The notion that it's sort of a playground that you get to play around with and imprint your own desire on was great, because I think we were more skeptical about being able to do that with story at the time. In fact, so much to the point where that became almost like a joke. That becomes the meta joke of the game, of how little agency you have in your story. But agency in terms of how you play the experience and how you load out your weapons and how you interact with the environment, as compared to most shooters at the time, where basically like you can shoot them with a shotgun or shoot them with the pistol. That was really important to us. So we spent a lot of time trying to make the world react in a way that you would expect and hope it to react when you tried something.
And some of those system or decisions we made about
Sup,
systems
dog?
fed back into the narrative,
Sup,
like
daddy?
locking Adam behind Big Daddy and the little sister. Like, you can't get Adam unless you deal with the Big Daddy, which then becomes a roving boss fight, which then becomes another system that I don't know if we planned that from the start, or it was one of those happy, like, serendipity, like, oh, this decision that we made about putting Adam behind the Big Daddy totally works, because now we have a different type of boss fight that you hadn't really seen in other games.
It was the other way, because what happened was originally there was no concept of Adam, and Big Daddy just had money and other treasure on them, like every other splicer. Yeah. And they were so tough, nobody would ever fight them, because why on earth would you go after that guy?
Right, go off a bunch of small slicers and get the same amount. Yeah.
So we had to come up with a currency that was exclusive to them.
Yeah.
Because we knew that was where the fun was, right? Yeah. But we also knew people were terrified of them, and we didn't want to fight them. So video game development and system
Daddy
is a lot like
issues.
economics, right? In economics, you try to encourage certain behaviors through tax, usually through tax policy. You want business growth, so you lower taxes on certain segments of the business economy, or you want to encourage, people to move into this area, so you make incentives to move in here. We had to make an incentive for players to fight the Big Daddy, and Adam became that incentive. And then, once you had this Adam, then you had a new piece of narrative, which they could then incorporate back into the story.
Taste the Adam fucking drink.
Stay away from her, or it is you who will be shot next.
Easy now, Doctor. He's just looking for a wee bit of Adam. Just enough to get by.
I'll not have him hurt my little ones.
Talk a bit about the plasmids and the vending machines and that sort of whole approach to, I guess, what is kind of a tech tree, but and coming from PC games, used to strategy games and whatnot, with very complicated ways of how you would upgrade things. I thought you guys did a really interesting approach to how you made it very accessible to a console audience. How did that evolve? Did you know the vending machines were going to be there from the get-go?
Well, we had vending machines in System Shock 2, so we were sort of lifting that, and I always thought that was a fun.
It's different
notion to because it's a affordance.
I never played the other game, so I can't say one way or another.
Vending machine, they know immediately. Oh, that's where I buy stuff, right? Yeah. And you also then have to have a shopkeeper. When we talked about wanting to make things, put limitations on ourselves so things felt fully believable. Yeah. We had a shopkeeper sitting there. You can't shoot him. He sits there. He doesn't say anything. And all of a sudden, he feels fake. Where a vending machine, the Circus of Values machine, could feel 100% authentic. Despite the fact that it's selling like ammo and stuff like that, which is.
But in an objective society where you don't have rules and regulations on that type of thing, it feeds back into the narrative.
But you don't then break fiction at all by having these characters who sort of don't really live and breathe in the world. So the vending machines became an important part of that, but we still want to give them character, and hence and so that clown image came from a piece of. That image is actually from like a fruit container or something like that. Okay. And so we had a book.
I think I've seen that.
Images.
Yeah.
I saw that image and I'm like, let's put that clown on it. We'll call it Circus of Values. We wrote lines for it. Decided and we hired the best actor in the world to play that part. That was me. That didn't cost anything.
Oh my god.
Really?
It's a clown.
Yeah.
No, it's a clown.
Hear it in my head every day.
My wife hates that voice. She hates that voice.
Give us a little of it right here.
welcome to the circus of values. She does not allow me to do that, so I do that outside of the house. But it allowed us to.
Imagine if he uses that in the bedroom.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Feel your cravings at the circus of value.
And also, you know,
Oh my god.
plasmids and sort of
I mean,
sort of the videos and how you explain sort of what a plasmid was. That was a really fun way, I thought, to sort of explain that. Sean, how did you guys evolve that? Because it was a very artistic approach.
I think those came on pretty late too, because we were developing all these systems, and you make the assumptions because you're dealing with them every day that the player who gets this game is going to understand what these systems are. And we always joke that you can't ship a developer of the game, or you can't expect somebody to have a README file for all of these things. Nobody's understanding what these plasmids are or how to use them. How do we present these to the audience in such a way that they're going to understand what it is fictionally and what it is functionally? We drop water in a lot of the animations on those, and we sit down and we write out like a little 30-second commercial of what this thing is. And again, because going back to the narrative, this is what would happen in Rapture. People are trying to sell these things, so they would come up with commercials to explain why you need this. Using that as your framework, you can then come up with all of these little gags that people will remember, that have a little personality to them. But I think ultimately in the end weren't that expensive to create, because they're cheap.
I think one of the most important things about it is we didn't want them to be long, and we didn't have a lot of budget for the art, so we had like a couple of frames of animation in them essentially. And so we had to figure out, how do we message how this thing works in like that, and that's what marketing is, right? It's how do you message how something works, and marketing and tutorializing are very similar things. Right? You're trying to get a message across in a very brief period of time in a very snappy fashion. And I think that one of the things that I always felt about games is that tutorials are sort of death, and because they're usually like you go into a scene and there's like a shooting range or something like that, and
Narratively, they never really make sense either.
And they're so boring. And so we always try to put a big burden on ourselves of how do we train people while not letting them know they're being trained, and brevity is really important to that. So we had a bunch of art constraints in that, which also led to a bunch of writing constraints. And so those things were like, I don't even know if they were 30 seconds.
Yeah,
they were
like
really
15
short.
seconds.
Yeah, 15 seconds long. We had to explain a whole plasmid in that period of time, and I think that was a good exercise because it also made the game, it forced us to be concise and to really explain what this thing was like that.
I'm a huge fan of vintage everything. So I do know the clown that they was talking about. I love vintage commercials. I love the 1920s up to the 40s. Hell, even the 50s style and a lot of things. So, okay. Yeah, so, yeah, with the game, even though this is my second run of it, like, I forgot almost everything about this game. And I still really don't remember playing it the first time. But even with that, you can still tell, like, this is a time era, this is a style, they had these in this year, they had that in that year.
Yeah, they had different wording, the style, the art, even the money. If you look at the fine details in the game, even the money is old school looking.
Oh, yeah.
And it's fantastic, all the little details. But one of the things I love most about this game is its replayability, because even though it is the same game over and over, you discover new parts of the environment. You're finding like chalkboards with like a little kid's drawing on it that you didn't see before, or just little things in corners, finding stuff under stairs, stuff like that.
Hidden secrets, hidden films, and all of that. Like, I didn't know these commentaries would be this long. But yeah, this game absolutely has replayability. You can go for like a different ending, or you can make subtle differences in your gaming style. And if I was to play this again, I would still be lost as fuck. But I would be smart enough to look up a cheat code. Yay, cheating. But let's move on to the last for this video is the creative process, which creativity for me is always extra sexy.
Nailing the perfect marriage of story to gameplay is a science that many developers still struggle with today. BioShock has left an indelible mark on gaming narrative that can be seen and felt in many modern releases, but Irrational's motto remained from the beginning, don't start with the story, start with the gameplay.
Oh my. I am out of glubs. God damn it. I have no coffee and I have no mood juice.
Sucks to be you.
It
A lot
does.
of fans probably wonder about the process you go through in writing the story and the design for a game like BioShock. You've talked about how it evolved over time and what eventually ships is very different than your initial vision. Do you guys write like a script or a design document for the game and that becomes sort of the Bible that everyone drives towards, or do you iterate much more?
It's different for every game. Like System Shock 2, I went back to it recently. I wrote a design document, and like we started that project in September, and the design document I saw was dated like October or something. So like in a month, like I wrote the design document, and it didn't change. A lot of it, got expanded upon, but the basic design really didn't change on that. Where on BioShock, I think it evolved in real time much more. Like we had a pretty substantial design shift, like a year before the ship date.
For BioShock?
BioShock, yeah. It got to be much more about the experience of being in Rapture than about being in your character sheet. And so the game evolved more towards that experiential kind of thing and making sure every idea was expressed in the world as well as just on your character sheet. So before you'd have a lot of things like, I'm doing fire damage or electrical damage, but that was sort of a number flying off ahead versus, the whole notion of like, there's barrels and you light them on fire and then you can pick them up and throw them.
But you'd have stats coming off characters and all that stuff?
Much more so.
Oh, really?
And that evolved, sort of, we did a design shift, but I don't know how well that got documented. I think we were moving so fast that we were just sort of changing things, laying down the tracks as we went right ahead of us. And same with the screenplay, the screenplay there is no screenplay. It's a bunch of probably Excel files and fragments of Word documents.
Yep.
Recording sessions, and I'd rewrite on the fly once I hear the actor perform. Because once the actor takes on it, you listen to their voice and you say, what you wrote doesn't really matter. Like, what is the right thing for this actor playing this role?
Yes.
I
Yes.
tend to do a lot of rewriting in the session, and then like you have a bug late at night where somebody says, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense," and you're like, "Oh God," you have to write a new audio log and try to get the actor back in, or you figure out what's the best way to get this idea across. And is it an audio log? Is it a poster on the wall? Is it a piece of text that pops up on the screen? That's always depending on how much time you have and what actor availability is. So, the plans sort of fall apart. I think we've worked on that a bunch since. The new project we're working on where, we are trying to document things a lot better and keep things a lot more logical, but the train was running so fast on BioShock that we just sort of...
early on, we got the Andrew Ryan scene in, like we'd said before, and that was kind of like the keystone. Like, we're going to put a lot of work into this, so this can't change. Everything that happens before or after that don't really involve a lot of departments working together to make a scene, those things are very malleable, and if you need to change audio logs to represent a story, if you need to add lines or take away lines, that's very doable. And I think for a while we even had like text to speech.
We even did that I remember for Infinite with Booker and Elizabeth with all their dialogue, and that really didn't work very well because you'd have these dramatic scenes and it'd be like, Elizabeth, we need to go to Comstock, and it just it almost had no value as far as I was concerned.
Atlas radioed on ahead. Says we're looking for an invite to the fisheries. Nuts, I say. But if your heads up to the Wharf Master's office and find old Peach on research camera, maybe I could manage an invite.
You dirty man.
Ken has so much of these games in his head.
It wasn't research. It was the research. Yes. With extra sausage.
Because this is evolving and Ken's thinking in his head about how this ties together, how does the team sort of keep up with, what the whole game's going to look like?
There's a lot of specifics that can change. For instance, Atlas used to have a southern drawl, and then we recast to the Irish.
And we actually cast an actor, wrote the lines, did the whole thing, and realized that people hated that character and distrusted him from the first start. So had to rewrite him, recast him, redo everything.
Yeah, from a team perspective, you kind of get a sense on which things are going to be really volatile and that you probably want to push off till later, because if you work on it now, it might change. Larger themes don't tend to change too much, meaning we knew we were in Rapture, we knew we had Big Daddies, we knew we had Little Sisters, we knew we had Splicers, we knew what the arc of the story was about Jack coming into Rapture, and the specifics of this radio log versus that radio log didn't really affect anyone outside the audio team at that time, because we could still build the environment. We still knew what the environment was. We still knew what the animations were. There are areas you learn just by working in the same space for a while that this scene, I'm not touching this yet because I know that it's going to get changed a lot. I think these themes are pretty nailed down, so I'm going to focus the team on getting these things done.
I won't leave you twisting in the wind. We're gonna need to draw out of hiding, but you're gonna have to trust me.
The audio logs were, a great part of the game, and something that if you're a true fan, I mean, people really go in and listen to those and piece that all together. But I imagine there's a lot of work that goes into deciding, well, this is better for an audio log versus game dialogue, and the actors sort of cutting back and sort of saying, we need to be clear about what the narrative is for the game. What was that process like? I mean, the audio logs, were there things you added at the end, or were those, ideas that you had for the game, but then said, hey, maybe we'd demote these a little bit to make them audio logs?
As Sean was saying, there's sort of a hierarchy of expense
Mood juice.
that you have to face.
Mood
and so
juice.
any ideas you have to get across, especially as you start playing the game, you realize, well, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. You have to figure out how you can introduce that idea. And generally, as the train is moving, you try to think of cheaper and cheaper ways to get those ideas across. It's less important, it goes to an audio log. If it's less important, it goes to a poster on the wall.
Well, there's also characters that you can bring in that have audio logs that aren't. Atlas, Tenenbaum, those are your big ones. You can bring in somebody to do a short, a few different audio logs. It's a character that some players may not even find, but it adds a little bit of depth to Rapture.
And it also, usually each character generally is about a certain idea, and we don't just sort of come up with characters, we have an idea problem that we need to solve, and so let's introduce a character who's this guy, and he will be the guy who sort of shepherds you through that idea.
Julie, my dear, I am trying to run a business here. You want to spend time with my honeybees? Well, I'm gonna have to start charging you for the pleasure. If I come out one more time and find you lolling out there amongst my hives, I'm grabbing my shotgun. As to your question, yes, my days in beekeeping school are a blur. But I do seem to remember something about that enzyme you keep blabbing on about.
So as you're going through the game and, writing things, rewriting things, were there things with the original BioShock that you've always been surprised that more people didn't pick up on, or was there something that, a connection to a character you thought was really going to resonate with people, which, didn't? Anything like that?
No, it's the opposite. I was amazed, I don't know how you felt, but I was amazed how many people connected to the Would You Kindly stuff.
Yep.
Because I think it was when I wrote that speech, I don't think anybody on the team was like, oh my God, this is really this or that. And I don't think I really had any sense that people were going to connect to it. I think we ended up sort of over time finding more ways to support the notion throughout the game.
Yep.
And I don't think I really, until I heard Pat put together the revelation moment, whereas where you had all the bits that Atlas had said to you in the past building up, and then there was a visual that went along with that. That's when I realized it was going to be a really powerful moment. But even so, I still did I think people were really going to connect to it or really even understand it? Because it's pretty out there. And that it was meta commentary too. I think that completely, I think I thought oh, it's kind of meta, cool. But people connected to it in a much bigger way.
Yeah, the choice to and everything, and also just, being able to kind of roll back and think of all those other moments throughout the game. And it's a great revelation like that. They're few and far between in games where you're sort of then you want to play it again, you're just oh wow, really, that does all make sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a team, we were definitely proud of what we had done. But up till that point, SWAT 4 was the biggest game that we worked on, and we had no expectation that anybody would pick this up. Or even BioShock cosplay. I remember the first cosplay I saw the guy in the Big Daddy suit, and his little daughter was in the kitchen cabinet. I think that was the first one I saw. I was like, what? Whoa. Know this stuff? That's insane.
Yeah, people were building these outfits, and that only expanded with Infinite. I mean, that sort of went crazy with Infinite. People cosplaying Elizabeth and Luteces and Booker. It meant a lot to people, and I don't think that's something we ever saw coming, and we're deeply grateful for it, because it's one thing to make a game and get good reviews and stuff like that. It's another thing to have things that people are having their weddings themed around it, and their tattoos and naming their children after characters. You can't plan for that. And I think the only way that can happen is to make something that you're deeply in love with and passionate about. I can say we were. It was something there was a lot of passion on the team about. But we didn't know people were gonna take away what they did.
Would you kindly?
Would you kindly?
Powerful phrase.
Would you kindly help me plan my future BioShock wedding?
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Alaskan, would you kindly suck my dick?
So much that they dive into every word.
Yeah.
Audio log and try and connect all the fiction, make sure it all makes sense. Are there any things from that game that you sort of look back and it's like, oh wow, like we didn't explain this and we should have, or things that fans have misinterpreted over the years?
There are things we think that we did that should have or shouldn't have been in the game. Like I was never a fan of having two endings, and I think
that's what the publisher was asking you to sort of have a.
That was the one thing that 2K, and they were very hands off. That was the one thing they insisted on, and it's not something I really thought was a good idea, because they're still limited, even though they're multiple, they're still limited. And so that was something that we ended up doing. One of the endings was far better than the other one. I mean, there's no. It's clear that I was much more interested in the happier ending with Little Sister.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was, I'm sure part of it was the idea that, if this game is, if you're making a choice throughout it, I'm sure when some old people are like, oh, well, then it has to be a payoff, right?
Right. Except the game was really about lack
There
of
was no
choice.
choice.
So that always struck me as a tension that was weird, but look, at the end of the day, they were putting up a lot of money, and so I can't really complain. They weren't dictatorial at all during the development. So that was the one thing, but that's a game that I wouldn't have put the boss battle in. Final boss battle. Like we seem to end up doing that over and over and over again. Every time we start a project, I'm like, I'm never going to do that again. We're never going to do that again, and we end up doing it.
Right.
We're not good at boss battles, and that you're fighting that guy, and look, this is the naked dude. It just doesn't work.
Totally makes sense.
He had the blue balls.
That worked really well up till then, but then it just doesn't work. That boss battle's silly.
I did enjoy it personally.
Yeah, because I really enjoyed it.
And I got to make some innuendos. As stupid as they were.
Because, yeah, that really is... It's a very basic boss battle, but it's done in a way that it is difficult, but not rage difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot of boss battles tend to be. It's got the different stages, it's got the different life bars, it's got the different abilities and stuff like that really makes it great. Yeah. Then you've got the environmental stuff with the splicers and the security system coming at you. And it's just... It's a really good boss battle, but I do understand that it doesn't really fit. I do get that. But it kind of does at the same time.
Out of all the boss battles that I remember doing, which fucking isn't much, like I said, my memory is shit. Unless something really, really stands out to me. Yeah, the boss battle, I actually did really enjoy it. I like the fact if you die in the game, you have to restart the entire scene all over again. So that gives you extra panic. That gives you extra motive. It's not like killing a big daddy. Oh, he's halfway down and then you get your head butchered off. So you just come back to life and the big daddy's still halfway down. It's like, no, if you die, you have to restart the whole fucking battle all over again. But it was terrifying. It got me on edge, and I had to use, like, all of my finger strength, and dexterity, which is also really shit, by the way, just to survive. And it's like this whole gameplay, it was just leading up to how quick your dexterity is. So I did like it, I did enjoy it. But yeah, with the creativity, talking about changes from the beginning to what actually gets put out. Now, for those who don't know, I participate in film competitions as a director, as an actress as well. I'm also the writer and editor, the prop maker, and everything else. But I am one person, so I need my team. And the one thing you gotta do as a director is, if you know someone has more experience than you in a particular subject, listen to them. And it is because of my team that I actually got a trophy. Well, not my trophy, my team's trophy. Yep, right here. Best costume. Got a happy little ghoulie guy, little zom guy, and I'm so proud of everyone who participated in it. But the competitions I do is the 48-hour film festival. You have 48 hours to write a script, get the prop that's needed, that is required to be in the film, have the line written that has to be said in the film, and the name of a character or the specific character that has to be in your film. And you have 48 hours to get all of that shit, write it, edit it, film it, shoot it, and edit everything. Get all that legal paperwork in order, and send it off. It is extremely difficult because in the process, in a couple hours, my mind will have an idea based on the category I get, and I'm going through my average is like 350 changes I make to a film for each competitions. But the process of what you start with versus what you end up with, more than anything else, is vastly different. Now, but yeah, the creative process, it changes so fast. And if I have like a basic strip, I'm going to strip later. Yeah. I'm sorry guys, it's like 4 in the morning right now. If I'm working on a script and I ask for a person that can do the work with me, who I know who has better knowledge, I need their input. I'm okay being wrong because then I get to learn what's right, and if I am right, I get to see the other person's viewpoint, which helps me learn better regardless. But everything that I do, film work, prop making, editing, everything I do creative wise, where I start is nowhere fucking near how I end. I love creativity. I love making, I love building, I love creating, because it makes me happy. Even though I am dead fucking tired and my soul is dead now because I'm tired. So, I think we are going to cut these 3 videos right here. Want to thank you all so much for joining us in this movie theater episode of the Director's Commentary. If you do like what you see, join us for the next movie with more snacks, more popcorn, more you, all of me.
And
so
we will be doing the rest of BioShock, by the way.
Yeah, we will.
Just not anytime soon.
No, we will complete those later. I got a few more games I gotta go through that will special requested. And special request gets the VIP pass. So, if you do like what you see, awesome. Feel free to join us in the next episode, in the next Let's Play, and the next Director's Commentary with snackies and popcorn. So until next time, bye.
Farewell, humans.
Farewell, humans. My fellow slug people. My big, strong daddies.